Okay, so I had a completely different story in mind for tonight, but with everybody sharing these personal, heartfelt, inspirational stories, I felt it was only appropriate to do the same, despite the fact that I'm really terrified to do this, which makes tonight's show very fitting. And I do want to apologize since this wasn't prepared. If I go a little over, trip over my words, my apologies. So when I was a child, I was incredibly bullied, horrifically bullied. I was small, I was skinny, painfully shy, and while mostly it was verbal, there was a few times of physical, but honestly what hurt the worst was the verbal. I used to, and people don't understand that, I would try to explain to them that you can get hit and you can get back up and you can walk away, but when you're a child and you have another child come up to you and tell you that you should kill yourself because you're a waste of space, that destroys you. And for years, I would deal with this. And anytime I would finally work up the courage to befriend someone, 9 times out of 10, they would betray me and side with the bully because they were too afraid to stand up to the bully themselves. This would go on for years, and I was petrified to go to school. I was having suicidal thoughts, and this is going to sound weird, but I was never strong enough to act on them, which is a blessing in hindsight, but it's just so weird to think about. So me wanting to constantly skip school, play hooky, my parents were doing their best to intervene with therapy, and the decision they made around 7th grade was, well, we're going to send you to a Catholic school. Even though we didn't have much money, they were going to foot the bill, thinking that it would be a more comforting environment. Unfortunately, it was not. Not only were the students worse, but my teacher was the biggest bully of them all. Now, throughout all of my scholarly years, the teachers always stuck up for me, and I could always look at them as the heroes. But now I'm having a teacher that's constantly belittling me in front of the class, making fun of me, having the other students make fun of me, and even making fun of my mother when she once went to a student-teacher conference and said, "Does he not own anything other than tennis shoes?" I had only felt comfortable on online message boards at that point as a 12-year-old kid just because nobody could see me. And I had gotten to the point, it was around Christmas, that I just couldn't take this anymore. And now we know that I have a mental illness. I deal with anxiety and depression. At the time, we weren't quite sure, so I didn't know how to deal with it. My mind was fragile, and I went online, and I made remarks that I was going to go into school, and I was going to take action, and I was going to kill the teacher and the bullies because I couldn't take it anymore. And I don't know if I ever would have done it. I know I put the steak knife in the backpack, but thankfully people on that message board took it seriously. They tried to console me, and somebody called the cops. Somebody all the way in Seattle, Washington, who I've since gotten to meet, Portland, Oregon, who I've since gotten to meet and thank for saving my life. Because the next morning, I can remember it vividly, I'm sitting at the kitchen table. My mother had just had a surgery, so she's bedbound. I'm eating cereal, my dad goes to leave, it's around 6:30 in the morning. Not a few seconds go by, he walks back in, and I just see what can only be a row of cops storming into the house. And I dropped my spoon, I froze, and my mother said, "Justin, what did you do?" They arrested me that day on the basis of terroristic threats. And hindsight, the biggest blessing in the world, because they took me to a mental institution. And I actually want to name them Phil Haven. They did tremendous work with me. We discovered the root of my problems, and they got me back on track. 7th grade, I ended up being homeschooled by my mother. That way I could go back into regular school 8th grade in the IU unit. By the time I reached high school, I had graduated, and I was told that as long as I stayed out of trouble, that I would, once I'm older, it's never really gonna show up on my record. I never had to put it on a job application or anything like that. And I did. There were a few altercations, but I always just stood my ground. I fought too damn hard to let any small little fight get in the way of my progress. And I'm telling this story, one, not because I'm the courageous one here. Honestly, I had no intentions of telling this story. It's something that I've only told a few people because I'm always afraid of the looks or how people are going to perceive you, especially now when we get, unfortunately, more and more school shootings. And it does affect me, not one, because I'm human, and when you hear these stories, they are heartbreaking, but two, because I have flashbacks to what would I have happened if I would have done this, if somebody didn't intervene. And I'm so gracious that I had a judge that could notice that he wasn't looking at a menace or somebody who was evil or hateful, that he was just a scared child who was lashing out and at the end of the day just wanted to die. And I remember years later finding out about somebody who I was in Philhaven with who had wanted to commit suicide, but again, like me, he didn't have that strength. So what he did was he held up a Wendy's, and he held it with a gun, and when the cops came, he would not put the gun down. He pointed it out then, and the cops could tell that he wasn't gonna do it. He wanted somebody to put him out of his misery, but they couldn't take the chance of him harming someone, so they took him out of his misery. And I tend to think sometimes about how that could have been me. Now, as a good thing, I have graduated high school, I even graduated college. I work 2 jobs that I absolutely enjoy. And this does still affect me on certain fronts, and I have faced this more now as an adult because I was ready to put that all behind me and think I'm okay, but anytime that I try to have a relationship, I've noticed that I push people away because of it, because I'm afraid to let people in. Because I don't think people realize, I remember in 9th grade when there was this gorgeous woman and I was just about to start dating her and she had found out about the incident. And when she asked me if it was true and I told her yes, I seen this fear in her eyes and she just said, "I'm sorry, but I can't do this, I don't want to see you anymore." And any time that I try to get into a relationship, I have nightmares about that and I can't get it out of my head. So the point of all this is, you are all courageous for telling your stories. You're courageous if you think you can't overcome something, because I was a scared 12-year-old kid behind bars for a few days before I was lucky that they let me out on house arrest and I fought and clawed to get back here. So you can do it. And you can also be the courageous one beside somebody who is afraid and maybe doesn't have a voice. Thank you.